Thank you very much for joining this session. Let's get animated. It's nice to see a younger crowd as well. So, what school are you guys from? Okay, all right. You were dragged in here, or is real curiosity that you are in this session? Well, hopefully we'll make it interesting for you. As Jinan mentioned, we have a fantastic panel members. Basically, they represent different areas within the animation filmmaking industry. But I'm not going to introduce them myself. I will let them take the floor and introduce their names and what it is that they are focusing on with regards to animation. We can start with Mina and we'll take it from there.
Is it working? So my name is Mina Takla, and I am the co-founder and the managing director of The Syndicate. What we basically do is we cover film festivals. We go to Cannes, London, Venice, and different film festivals, and we create content from there, basically articles, and then we sell them to publications within Hollywood and the Middle East to focus on the animated films, to focus on the foreign films, to focus on the Oscar race. So basically we're content creation when it comes to film. This is what I do.
Hello. I'm Anne-Marie Fleming. I'm from Canada, and I've just recently finished, I guess a year and a half ago now, an animated feature called Window Horses, The Poetic Persian Epiphany of Rosie Ming. And it's my little love letter, really. It's about trying to build bridges between cultures and generations through poetry, through art. And my background is as a writer, and I also work in live action. And I've also had a production company, a commercial production company, and yes, I'm an artist who has the privilege of making whatever I feel like.
It's a great privilege to have.
Yeah, it comes at a cost.
I'm sure.
Hello, my name is Walid. I am Marathi filmmakers. Started making short films, commercial, and different live action films as well. Moved to stop motion animation only now this year, and I made my first film, and it was screened yesterday. There will be another screening tomorrow. So I will talk about my experience and the switch between live action and into animation, stop motion in specific.
Hi everyone. My name is Fadi Bai. I work in comics. I don't know if anyone's heard of Samandal Comics, and I work in motion graphics as well and filmmaking. And the way that I got into the animation festival circuit was by being approached by Lebanon's art house cinema. It's called Metropolis, and they came to us, Samandal. They're like, we want to do an animation festival. You guys do comics? Is that close to animation? We're like, sure, we love animation. And that's how it started, where Beirut Mutaharrika, Beirut Animated, became this festival that sort of brought people from the region to show their films, and we're showing international films, local films, and doing workshops. It's supposed to be they do it every 2 years, and we're, I think, on the fifth edition, of Beirut Mutaharrika. So, yeah.
Excellent. Okay, I think what we're going to dive into right now is talking a little bit more about animation in terms of how it's defined in the filmmaking business. I think there's a lot of debate always about whether animation is technically just a genre of a way of delivering a story, or is it actually a filmmaking medium, a medium to tell a good story. And obviously, our panelists will definitely give you an insight on that because of what they have experienced in delivering story or in watching story or in drawing basically ideas of the things that they have seen. So let's start from the perspective of the festivals that you've attended, Mina, and what you have gathered in terms of that question.
There is certain stigma when it comes to award bodies that they think of animation as a genre and not as a medium that you can tell any story through. And when you look at the history of the Academy Awards, only 3 animated films have ever been nominated for Best Picture or Best Film. And in most of the other cases, they've been relegated to the animated category. Only Up, Toy Story 3, and Beauty and the Beast were the only films that were actually nominated for the main prize. This year, when I went to festivals, there were really many good films, animated films. I went to Annecy, and I was really surprised by the very indie and very low-budget films that can really compete with the big in the big leagues. But unfortunately, they're being just relegated to the animated category. I've seen films that have been made with almost no money, but they have the vision, they have the very compelling story. And that they really made with passion and with care. So I think animation is definitely a medium. It is something that can tell any story, and it can tell it with much imagination and creativity. But we need to change the way voters look at these films. They are not for kids. They are not films that are just made to be in one category and then they don't compete with the other stories. They deserve to be measured and looked at like any other film, like live action, like stop motion, like all sorts of films. They should not just be looked at as animation only.
Great, and let's see how we can validate that further. Anne-Marie, Window Horses. But before we talk about how that was a medium to tell a story, maybe we can actually watch the trailer so that people get an understanding of it before we dive deep into Window Horses.
Rosie, a book! Rosie is the poet.
Oh my God, you're published?
It's no big deal. It's just a little book of poems I printed. There's one more thing. I've been invited to...
Poetry festival in Iran?
Iran?
Yes, they found me. They found my work.
They found you?
I have to go. Come on, you think I've never been away before?
You've never been away before.
Reason for visit.
I'm a poet.
Iran is the land of poets.
Our next performer this morning is Rosie Ming.
Salam. My father was Persian.
He must be very proud of you.
So, your father is Persian?
My father abandoned me when I was 7.
But you are looking for his story, yes? So, you will find it everywhere.
Ask your question.
I've got my question.
Open the book and choose a poem.
How is it everybody here knows everything about everything?
The more you learn about others, the more you deepen your understanding of yourself. This is the journey we are all on.
Honestly, the animation style is beautiful, but I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to let you tell us a little bit more about the film, why you made it, how did you manage to make it, and what were some of the challenges that you faced in that perspective?
There's so many things to say, but if you look at just from the trailer, right, my central character is just a stick girl. Right, and she lives in a world of more fully realized 2D, and then there's all these different artists who are illustrating different poems, different parts of history, because this is a film about the imagination, about the point of view, how the more you know, the more we grow, the way your way of seeing the world changes. And here you have this central character. I've been working with Stick Girl for 30 years. She's my avatar. I created her when I was an animation student, and I was hit and run over by a couple of cars, and I didn't have any strength. I couldn't do anything, but I didn't want to drop out of school. I wanted so badly to learn how to be an animator, and so she represented all the strength I had, right? And she's like, I'm half Chinese, right? So she's, you know, sort of pseudo-Asian. But this is the first time she's been part Persian, Iranian, first time she's had a name, Rosie Ming, first time she's had someone else be her voice, Sandra Oh, first time she's been in a feature film, and people ask, well, why do you have a stick girl in this world? And the fact is that because she doesn't look like anything, right? She's so simple, you don't judge her. And she's completely open and curious, and that's sort of one of the themes of the film. And so she's still growing, she's still forming. And I find that I've been able to show this film all over the world, and all different types of audiences can actually relate to her, a stick girl who's half Persian, half Chinese, Canadian poet.
Wonderful. I guess my question to you is, you come from a live action background, correct? You've worked on a lot of live action films and shorts, as well as animation shorts. Why animation for this particular story?
Well, this story would have been impossible to tell live action. I just wouldn't have been able to do it for a variety of reasons. But as I said, the themes that I want to work on about discovery and point of view and the imagination, that animation is such a beautiful way to do that, because you can change it up whenever you want. And also, I was able to work with different artists who could bring their own sensibilities to the project. So I think for my story, it was perfect.
Obviously, animation comes in different styles. I mean, the overriding style that we all watch at the box office films is 3D and very intricate and sophisticated. However, here's a story delivered in a simple animation style. And this opens the window to talk about styles in general and how you can maneuver around different styles of animation to deliver a great story and not necessarily just 3D, which brings us to Walid and his film, which is Dimmed Light, which is currently running at TIFF, and your style of animation was stop motion, right? Which is completely different than Anne-Marie's, which is predominantly more 2D in style and look and feel. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, please?
Okay, stop motion, it's all about how you can imagine things and then you have to create them. Create them physically, it is not virtually or in the computer. So we had to, I have the idea for maybe 10 years, but we didn't have the tools, maybe the knowledge to be able to make this film as animation. So we had to go and learn how can we make things. How can we create stuff like small puppets? How can we create the small house? How can we create all the effects and everything you can think about or you want it to be in the film? You have to go and make it. And this is what make animation or maybe stop motion more difficult, because anything you can imagine, anything you want to be in the film, you have to go and make it. So we made all of this, and this will need a lot of education, a lot of learning process to be able to create those stuff, if you would like to make those stuff by yourself. For myself, went to a workshop, intensive workshop, just in how to make those small puppets act, which is very difficult, very complicated, because you are dealing with something, I don't know, stiff. All of the sudden, with your camera, you have to move it, and like you will give it a life, and it will start to move. And this is something, you can see it physically. And for myself, I like stop motion a lot, because you can create the texture, the real texture. Yani when I have small puppets, I can put a real cloth on that puppet, and it will be like real. It's a combination between real stuff and it is animated. It is not virtual animated characters. So I think learning will take a long time. It is not only even making the puppets by itself. You will need a lot of things, like learn how to sculpt in clay and then cast it into molds with gypsum or whatever, another silicone, and then cast the puppet in silicone or other stuff, and building armature so you will be able to animate. It is, but although it is very difficult and take long time to be able to master or to learn how to do those stuffs, but it is really interesting. At the same time, when I used to do my live action film, sometimes you give some compromises because of difficulties in finding location, the same as what you want to be in the film. But in stop motion, there's no limits. You can do whatever you want because it's like magic. It is like magic.
That's true. It's animation is a lot like making something out of nothing, honestly, because we were just talking about that before we started the panel. Is that with live action, you rely a lot on your crew and your actors to give you a lot to work with. With animation, you are literally with your artists creating things from nothing. And you're giving a voice and you're giving a personality to a character who's going to deliver a story for you. So it's definitely far more challenging and time-consuming within that regards. But moving on from that, and I think Fadi can give us an understanding of this from the platform Beirut Animated. I'm curious to know how Beirut Animated started and why. And what has been your experience in terms of the region's eagerness for this particular craft, genre, or filmmaking medium? It'd be very interesting to hear what you have gone through in the 4 editions that you've already run of Beirut Animated.
Well, I mean, basically, I come from an animation background as well, and so the love was already there. And the scene in at least 2009 was that there were different people that were doing their own independent work separately, and it was fragmented, and some of those films were either showing outside or they were showing as part of other festivals, but there was no one platform for these things. And I think this is basically where Metropolis said, maybe we should create a platform for this. And this is it. I mean, it basically immediately connected to our initial passion for these things. And of a certain age, we all grew up on a certain kind of animation. Specifically, it was Japanese animation. If you're growing up in the Middle East, you grew up on those kinds of shows. And that's kind of where the first edition started. When it came up, that's how we decided to put it out to the world, which was we put out these small teasers, which I think we have them loaded up. I don't know if sorry, Jinan, can we show there was the first teaser started playing around without actually announcing the festival, and it was the first edition, so no one knew what was going on, and it was really about connecting it to what we grew up on. Are we going to be able to play them, or?
Yeah, we're going to run it in a second.
So, I mean, I don't know if
that's all that Beirut needs at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it really does need that, I find. But this is Ar-Rajul Hadidi it's like 1970s, dinosaurs versus animated characters. It was a mishmash of everything. And so when this came out, everyone was asking about what's going on, and then we put out a trailer which featured Grendizer, and again, this is really sort of brought everyone together. There was also the Sammy Clark, the guy who sang. Grendizer was there, and this is where the Beirut Animated, what it was there for, became evident to us, which was bridging the stuff that we grew up on, which is for children, and I think usually that's where you plant these ideas, where you're like, wow, this is the magic of animation, into all these people who grew up and started working in this field. And it was about sort of bringing them together, bringing them all into one place. And we discovered that people flew in from Jordan, people flew in from Syria and from Egypt, and we realized that there was no place. I mean, as animators, you're usually sitting alone in a dark room, working for days, and you stink and nobody wants to talk to you. You can't speak to anyone because time just stretches out. And here was a place to put all these stinky people together who love the same thing, and to do workshops and really connect what was happening locally to, you know, what was happening internationally. People with work outside coming to Lebanon, giving workshops, meeting, and out of that there was, you know, connections that were being made, bridges that were being built, and, you know, over like edition after edition, we started seeing teams and people who almost found the confidence to realize that they weren't really just working alone, and, you know, and they were part of a much bigger audience. There was an audience out there and part of a bigger, you know, a medium that's happening in the region. It is a nascent medium. I don't think we really have, we either have like super commercial industry work, but the independent animation work was sort of what we wanted to start pushing for. And over the editions that sort of grew, but I think especially in the Middle East, there wasn't a lot of place for the people that were doing animations independently, just, you know, for stories that they wanted to tell. This was sort of the place for them.
Excellent. It's interesting to hear that, like in live action, people start in filmmaking as independent filmmakers, and they keep trial and testing until they get their break into coming into more of a wider production scenario where they can actually produce and go further and bigger in what they're trying to achieve. The same applies, by the way, for the animation cycle. You can start as an independent animator, building a small short story, and then build around that and put it out there so that you start creating and learning the craft and growing more into understanding how to deliver it. I think one important thing that I would like us to focus on right now is, again, going back to whether animation is truly a narrative medium of telling a good story. And I want to ask Mina here, you mentioned to me that there are some changing rules about how they look at animated film.
Yes.
All right, starting from obviously the Academy, which is interesting to hear about.
So let me explain to you. I just want to give a quick shout out to, I'm going to allude to what Fadi is saying. Waves 98 is the first Arab short film to win the Palme d'Or, and it's an animated film. It's a Lebanese film, and I highly recommend you guys watch it because it's been really a great film. And I watched it in Cannes, and it won. And I was very happy to see a huge award body like in the Cannes Film Festival award a Palme d'Or for a short film which is animated. So that was really great to see. The Academy of Motion Arts and Pictures and Sciences is around 7,000 voters. It's made of different branches. So there's the sound branch, there's the cinematographer's branch, there's different branches. The way the voting happens is each branch specialized in a specific area of the industry. They nominate or they vote on the nominees. Only the Best Picture category used to be all branches they can get to vote and choose their favorite films of the year so that they can get a nomination. In all previous years, there was this animation branch made of 200 or 300 voters. They used to be the only voters who are voting on the Best Animated Feature category. Now, last year, the Academy changed the voting, and now all the branches, whether you're a cinematographer or whether you're a sound engineer or whether you're an actor, all of these branches can now vote for the Best Animated Feature. So this means that you don't have to be a specialized animator to actually choose the 5 nominees in the Oscars, the 5 animated nominees in the Oscars. What does this mean for the filmmakers? It means that if you're an independent filmmaker, you have to push and make a bigger campaign and a much bigger effort to campaign for your films, because everyone now gets to vote. Previously, very small films made on actually zero budget, like The Boy and the World, which is the Brazilian film, or films like Song of the Sea from Ireland. These films were able to get nominations in the Oscars because specialized voters who appreciate the craft of animation used to be the ones voting for it. Now this year, you have to be visible, you have to be on the campaign trail, you have to be campaigning for your film because everyone is voting. You have 7,000 members voting, so if they don't see your film in cinemas, or if they don't see your films in festivals, then they won't notice it and you won't get nominated. So filmmakers like Anne and filmmakers like Noura Tomi for The Breadwinner and other filmmakers, they have a lot of effort that they need to put this year to get noticed, to get visible, and to make sure that voters notice their films. many people were unhappy about that rule change. Many filmmakers were, they felt that this is actually a step back because in a way, independent filmmaking in animation will be less noticed, and big studio films that have the money to put on campaigns like Pixar and Disney and Illumination Entertainment, this means that they will be noticed more. So hopefully this year when the nominations come out, we do find independent animated features nominated, because this rule change is a big question mark at the moment in Hollywood. So let's see, but I hope independent films don't get lost in the shuffle, and that the bigger picture or the bigger branches get to appreciate these small films and they put them in their nominations when they vote.
Great. Obviously, it takes a lot to market your film and to get it out there. And one of the things that helps you create a good film is actually getting the right funds in place. So I wanted to talk with Anne-Marie to tell us how she managed to put her funding together for Window Horses. And I also read a little bit about how you were animating remotely. And not necessarily everybody was in the same studio, sitting at in the same time zone, working on this. Can you tell us a little bit more about that journey?
Yes. And just maybe I'll answer your second question first, because I've already forgotten the first one.
It's
yeah,
money.
No, I know you'll
I'll get
remind
back to
me.
the money.
This, I'm used to working alone, very sort of hermetically, or with, somebody else. And I've always had this idea that, especially with animation, especially when things are digital, that everybody should be able to live and work where they want, how they want, on their own time. Like, this is my dream. It's not everybody's, but so I just reached out, very small budget, I always knew that. I reached out to animators that I knew, friends of mine, and also people that I admired, all across the country to ask if they would help make this film. And so I rarely even talked to people, rarely in person, rarely even on the phone. Everything was done, email and digital files back and forth. And all this took really was, I don't have like super servers or super service or anything like that. It just takes patience and trust, right? And so I think I'm not like a lot of animation directors, or this is what I hear, is that I'm willing to, this is a collaboration, and I know that some things will be lost in translation, but I'm willing to make it all work together, right? And, this film that I made, where this, young, half Asian, half Persian stick girl goes to a poetry festival in Iran to find out about her father who abandoned her as a young child, blah, blah, blah. So it was really hard to fund, right? And especially in North America. It originally wasn't going to take place in Iran. It was an idea that came to me when I was in artist residency in Germany many, many years ago, where I was surrounded with artists from all these different diasporas, all with their stories, and of a generation where they were all talking about what happened after the Second World War, right? And it was, I wanted, and I was also, a lot of these people were poets and writers, and I was also being introduced to the poetry of Rumi then. When I came back to Vancouver many years later and I was introduced to the Iranian diaspora, I was aware of how little I knew about that culture, how similar these stories were to what I'd been hearing for, all over the world. And also, I have to say, there was quite a lot of, Islamophobia in North America. And I wanted to take this great culture of, and mix it with my own, my own roots in China, and talk about poetry and talk about how these two things are the same, and how poems from 1,000 years ago are still relevant. We're still the same human beings. We look at the same moon. We miss the same people. We go through the same slings and slays of politics and fortune. And 2009 happened, and the Iranian elections, and there was a lot of violence, and Canada cut off diplomatic relations, and it was impossible, it was unthinkable to make a film that took place in Iran. And but I'm just so stubborn, and a few years later, it is true, a few years later, I was able to contact my friend Sandra Oh, who 20 years ago, we were supposed to make a film together, and it didn't happen. And she went to Los Angeles and became very well known. And I went to this artist residency in Germany. And she had, I said, will you be the voice? Sorry, this is a bit long. Will you be the voice of this girl, right? I just want 2 hours of your time. And I'm doing this Indiegogo campaign, you know, a crowdfunding campaign, and she loved the story so much, it was so personally relevant to her that she became the spokesperson for it. And she just finished 10 years of Grey's Anatomy, so we were able to get a lot of attention. Everybody wanted to hear what her next project was and what she cared about, so we had all this international press just talking about tolerance and peace and diversity and culture and art. It was incredible. There's no film. They just wanted to know what Sandra was thinking about, you know? And so we started a social media campaign then. I was talking to Mina about this before that, because Sandra has become busy again since then. I caught her in this beautiful spot, you know, where she had a little window of time. So it's been really hard for us because there was all that interest with the stars that we were able to attract because of Sandra, like Ellen Page and Shorey Agdashlu and people like this, and they have not participated in the promotion of the film. So now I'm back to my little message, right? And so it's been a challenge, but we keep on working.
Excellent. Okay. So obviously animation presents a lot of challenges. And Walid, I'd like to ask, and I'd like you to share with the audience, how many people worked on Dimmed Light?
Because it's a small project and we worked only 4 people. I got some art directors from live action films, friends, to help me building the set. I built the puppets by myself and I animated with another friend who attended animation course as well. So it was a small team, but it took me a long time. My feature film took me around 18 to 21 days for filming. This stop motion took me almost a month. So it is more than, it's 8 minutes only, and that was 90 minutes. It took long time, but it's very interesting. It's real fun, as I said, because you are moving something stiff.
I mean, being involved in animation myself, I found we're always, there's a lot of personal passion that goes into making films using animation, and a lot of personal sacrifices. You take a lot more, it takes a lot more from you to make it happen because you're trying to create something, again, out of nothing. And you have a vision in your head, and you see it in your mind, and you want to create it from nothing. So it's definitely always takes far more personal involvement when you're actually working on animation. And I think, Fadi, in a lot of ways, probably that was the inspiration of starting the platform, because you saw all these artists who are probably very frustrated and wanted to work with that craft to deliver a great story. And probably that's why the Metropolis said, maybe we should create a place for these frustrated artists.
Yeah, it's very true. I mean, this is I don't know why we do this. I mean, it's because there's obviously we love it when it's done, but when you're doing it after a while it's so incremental and slow, and I find that it's really like a Zen meditation. After a while, you just have to sort of you dilate your time and yes, it's a lot of hard work. Which, I mean, when you're working commercially, you're getting paid, but then there's very little incentive if you can't show your stuff. If you're just going to put it on YouTube or put it online, and your friends are going to see it and that's it. So definitely, it's completely different when there's an audience there. And when there's an audience also specifically for, like an animation festival, it has its own audience. And they're coming with an appreciation of the art and with this readiness to sort of be surprised by a new style or a new approach. And again, there's, in our region, I think, there's this sort of feeling like this is, this is a medium that we're used to seeing outside. We watch Toy Story or we see, and this idea that, wait, I can use these, those are tools that I know how to use, and I can tell my own stories. And to have that platform, I think, is very important. Not to only be using this craft for, you know, whether it's branded content or commercial, not to you know, like, I'm not putting that down, but to tell your own stories is and use that those tools. I think there's something fabulous about it, and this is what sort of what we were looking to encourage, and this is what was sort of happening. And again, when you put these people with people that are working outside, then again there's new and strange things that start happening, and yeah, it just keeps growing, and I think that's pretty much what we were hoping for.
Okay, fantastic. So I would like to open it up now for the audience in case if there are any specific questions that you would like to ask with regards to animation in general. Are there any questions out there before we move on? I want to ask the students in the room, why are you here? Because I see that there's everybody with ties. Are you here because of your curiosity for this craft, or is it just because you've been dragged by your teacher, who's, I think, sitting at the back over there? I saw him giving you instructions. Is there any questions or anything like that that anybody would like to ask?
Yeah, we're here with some media students, actually, from year 12 and year 10. And animation is certainly something they need to know about in quite a lot of detail, really, for their coursework. I think we've got one student here, Lev, who would like to ask a question.
Yeah.
So Mina, I wanted to ask you a question. Do you feel that with these new rules in the animation scene, do you think it'll create problems for indie animated film creators?
Yeah, definitely, because previously your quality of your film as an independent animated feature, if you're a low budget film but have a lot of great content, great themes, great characters, you would be noticed because the people voting for you are the animated branch who appreciate your craft, and they actually are animators, so they've been in your shoes before and they've seen your struggles to make a film. But today, because the rule changed and now an actor can vote or a sound engineer can vote, they're not from animation background, so they don't know the amount of effort and it takes to make an animated film. So today, in this year, how visible you are, how big your Oscar campaign is, how many festivals you've been to, this is actually more important than the quality only, because of the fact that non-specialized people are voting this year. So it definitely creates a struggle for an indie animated films who don't have a budget to mount a big Oscar campaign. An Oscar campaign means you have to screen for voters, you have to take your film to lots of film festivals, you have to make, sometimes they actually make dinners and parties to actually bring in voters to make them watch the film. If you're on a small budget, you can't do that because sometimes you actually struggle to complete your film, let alone do other campaigns. So this year, they will not be as visible as the big studio films, and that creates a big challenge for them. So hopefully the non-specialized voters, like the sound engineers and the actors and directors, they take the extra step of actually watching the screeners. Now, let me explain that. All voters for the Academy, they get what's called a screener, which is a link to a digital file where they can watch the film online. They don't have to go to a film festival and watch it. So, but many of them, because of the fact that they get a pile of screeners, they get a list of a lot of like 30, 40 films they have to watch. And this year there's 26 eligible films in this race. So for them, it's a lot of films to watch in 3-4 weeks. So they depend on which festivals they've attended or which parties they've been invited to so that they can notice the film and watch it. So I'm hoping that this year, the fact that many non-specialized voters are voting, that they take the extra step and actually watch the screeners they've been given and see the craft and see the quality of these films being made. I do expect that this year we'll see a little bit less indie films making the list. In previous years, there were 3 films every year, or 2 films from an independent filmmaker, like films from Brazil, from Ireland. These films no one had heard of outside the animated branch. They made it because they had a lot of effort and quality in them. This year, I expect the studio films will dominate mostly. So you'll see Disney, you'll see Illumination, you'll see the big names, Warner Brothers, and we'll see less independent films. And it's not about quality; it's about the campaign, unfortunately. So I do think it's a big challenge.
Because you don't have to watch all the films. You have to commit to watching 80%. So you'll just ignore the ones that you haven't heard of.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, Window Horses is alphabetically the
The last, yeah.
So I don't know how it works for elections here.
Yeah.
But in Canada, like for the Parks Board, so you've got the municipal elections, and the Parks Board, tons of people run. It's how you get into politics.
Yes.
You know, nobody knows any of the names except their family, right? And so occasionally people vote for the guy with the last letter.
Okay.
Right? So it is true that for sure it's general feeling is it's going to benefit the studios.
Yeah.
But I think it's also a great opportunity because for people who don't know anything about animation to have an opportunity,
Yeah.
right? And I think there's a lot of space for different types of animation because everybody knows what kind of quality and what kind of stories the studios will be showing. It's going to be a variation on a theme. So I think it's an exciting opportunity. One of the reasons why I made a feature, I've made a lot of short animation and I've made feature-length docs and live action, is my shorts have never traveled in animation world. They always go to general film festivals. And so I wasn't expecting the feature to go to animated festivals either, which it has. I was thinking, but features get so much more attention than shorts in a general festival, whereas in an animation festival, shorts get more attention than features, which is ironic.
Yeah. And that's why you would see that when you look at the independent animated features campaigning this year, you would see that they're playing on what we call the narrative, which is not the story actually in the film, but why the film is important. They're playing on the importance category, the importance factor, because voters love to vote for something that makes them feel good. They like to vote for something important, that they're giving their voice to a cause or to an issue or something important. So
like Captain Underpants.
No, like the breadwinner as in women's rights in Afghanistan, or you would see Loving Vincent, the world's first fully animated, painted animated feature. So they play on the narrative and not just the story of the film, and that's something that they really need to do this year to get noticed. As a voter, I heard about this world's first fully animated, fully painted film. Let me watch it. Or women's rights in Afghanistan. This is something that makes them feel that they want to actually put the screener and watch it. So.
Excuse me, Mina, why did this change happen? Was this a push from
Yeah, so
studios?
actually it's a very interesting, last year Finding Nemo, which is the 4th highest grossing animated film in history, got snubbed actually, it wasn't nominated, and this pissed off a lot of like Pixar and Disney because the film was a huge success, and it actually is the highest. Finding Dory, yes.
Yeah.
And it's because it was also the highest grossing animated film in the States, domestically in the States. So studios like Disney and Illumination, also they had Minions previously and other studios, they felt that obscure films, small films that no one has heard of, are making the nominations, and on Oscar morning people watch the nominations as like, I have never heard of A Boy on the World, or what is Song of the Sea?
No? That's the point.
Yes.
It's like you would have never heard about it
But they
otherwise.
felt that in a way that voters are just going very indie or very obscure, and that people watching the ceremony, because the Oscars also have a big rating problem. So every year the number of people watching the Oscars is decreasing, not increasing. And the highest years people were watching the Oscars were like Titanic years, the year where Titanic was nominated. So they felt that they want to improve the rating and they want to make these big studios happy in a way, and that's a very sad thing actually, because when you look at the budget that Song of the Sea, a film from Ireland, was made, it was made by like 10% of a Pixar movie or a Disney movie. So the nomination or an Oscar nomination makes a big difference for these indie filmmakers, and thanks to this they've been able to actually secure distribution and let the films being seen. So I'm actually very upset that this is happening, and I think this is a big drawback for the category, and you shouldn't be trying to please the studios or the big names. And Finding Dory was a huge hit, and it was a big surprise that it was not nominated. So that created, of course, the Academy, the way they do this is they do these bi-quarterly meetings where the big executive committee meets and they decide what rule changes do they want to make. And that was something that they felt they want to improve the ratings, and the fact that the biggest animated film domestically in the States ever, which is Finding Dory, was not there, and films like A Boy in the World, which was made by pennies, actually made the list, that was something that upset the big names, and I find it very depressing, actually. So,
Can we ask? Can we have, yes, please, please, please.
Hello. Thank you very much for this panel. I wanted to commend you on the process you took in making the film, especially since you did it like remotely mostly. Second of all, my only connection with animation is through voiceover work and the cuteness factor, which brings me to my question. Musicals ended up being like marginalized as comedy in the Golden Globes, and so animation generically at the beginning was all about the score and the music, and everybody would watch Disney films because of what's the next soundtrack, and that only was revived with Frozen. So my question basically is, the music factor and the cuteness factor, does that steal away from the script? And does that steal away from the seriousness of what animated films should be?
May I answer that question as well? The problem is that I think the fact that Disney has basically overtaken this whole animation, as sort of like filmmaking medium, has in a lot of ways created these pillars that animated movies is only for kids. Animated movies has to have a song. Animated movies have to always be funny. It's not necessary that this is the case, and I think one of the things that is happening now slowly but surely, especially with the advance of a lot of things, and I'm not going to get into that because it's a completely different factor. Technology is only getting better, and animated films are looking more real every day. It's getting a little bit scary once you watch some of these films that are crafted in such meticulous ways. It has nothing to do with songs anymore. It has nothing to do with cuteness. It's got to do with telling a good story. That's it. That's what you have to say. And with Window Horses, for example, it's a good story for big people and small people. Anybody can watch it and get a great message out of it. And it's not that every animated feature has to have a song or has to be cute or has to have a sidekick comedic character. It's not necessary. It helps, but it's not necessary. What I think animation does help you with in storytelling is, if it's not real, then animate it. Because that's what animation offers you. The things that you cannot capture in real life. If it's beyond the real, beyond what the real can offer you, then go to animation. Because animation will give you the medium and the tools to make that happen. And I think in a lot of ways, Window Horses, Dimmed Light, I mean, when I think about it, Walid, you said with Dimmed Light, you had the idea in your head 9 years ago, right? And it's only after you learned the tool that you were able to produce the story, which means you needed a tool that will give you something outside the real. Am I correct to assume that?
Definitely. I think if a scene or an idea which I can execute in real live action film, why should I go to animation? Sometimes it is, well, this is my personal opinion, I think if something which I cannot make in live action, I will just go for animation. Because you can't do anything beyond anything.
Exactly. It gives you things that you cannot find. I mean, if your character just happens to be a bug that talks, all right? You're not going to find a bug that's going to talk in real life, so you better animate it and make that happen. And that's why a lot of people use animation as a tool of storytelling, because it gives you beyond what you really have available to you in the real world that you exist in. Are there any questions? Yes, Sami, please.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the panelists for the great insight. This has been amazing. You mentioned the point about Disney and having to have a song and having to have a cute character and having to have that format that we're so used to seeing as an animated film. But I think in the Arab world, that also extended beyond to another problem that you touched on earlier, where we grew up watching animated Japanese cartoons, and our parents saw us watching animated Japanese cartoons, and it became known that animation is for kids. Now that these young kids have grown up and gone into the filmmaking industry and started to make animation, they're still looked at as they're making content for kids. So how are we supposed to kind of elevate the industry or make the filmmakers or make the industry look beyond the theme or the stereotype here in the Middle East that animation is for kids? If you go abroad, if you go to Europe, maybe not the States as much, but if you go to Europe, animation is a very serious genre, and there's very heavy content that's presented on animation. We still lack that here in the Middle East, I think partly because of this problem. So how are we supposed to kind of move the whole industry forward mentally?
I think festivals are a big part of that, because a lot of, I guess it's the market, right? People, because animation takes a long time and it's expensive, people are looking for what they think the market will support, and so people are always looking at genre and they're looking at children, right? But if you go to any animation festival, I mean, there's no limit to what an animated film can present, or the way it can present it to you. And most of the material is not for children. At Window Horses, I didn't at all mean it for children, but in fact now it plays in children's festivals, and some of them. Right? Like everybody gets something else. And I think it's wonderful. I mean, children are so open, right? They're open to whatever. And one of the things that they like is animation. And so then you get older and you still love animation, but you have a different perspective and you want to show things in a different way. I think that it's fantastic to love animation your whole life. And I also think it's a really exciting time for independent animation and for different types of storytelling. Just like, in North America, about 10 years ago, there was sort of a watershed moment with the graphic novel. That was only for children. I mean, already it was very sophisticated in Japan, but not in Canada or the US. And then suddenly, I mean, now, we're just, filthy with graphic novels.
That's where they called it the graphic novel, no? It wasn't called the graphic novel.
Right, it was just
comics.
It was just comics, right? And I think that we're at the same point now where people go, oh my gosh, animation is an incredible medium to say anything. And also, people talk about how the feature film, the time of a feature film, and that it's really a continuation of 19th century Victorian storytelling, right? Victorian storytelling. That there's this way of telling a story, and which you don't have so much with short film, and you don't really have with animation, right? Because you sit in that seat and you're going to be taken someplace that does not exist, and you have to open your mind, So I think that animation is where it's at, yes.
Can I add, definitely festivals, that's where these things can happen, where the audience finds the films they're looking for. But I think also in the region is we need to use animation to tell stories for adults. And this is sort of, and specifically the stories that are particular to our region or region, I think it's a very general term. I think to wherever you are. And when you tell these stories using animation and then you really use whatever, the spectrum that animation allows you to bring to those stories, that's when we're going to start noticing. I mean, you mentioned Elid's film, Elid Daghir's film, Waves 98 was sort of, it's for a lot of people, definitely winning at Cannes, sort of brought it to people's attention, and when they watch it, the way that it's dealing with the stories of the city and the country, and it was very interesting. And it is these moments. Those are the moments where suddenly it changes in people's minds, and you're like, wait a minute, this is not a genre, it's not for children, this is a medium, and I can watch completely different kind of story than the stuff that I'm used to. But usually, again, you're fighting against big industry and blockbuster films and Transformers 10, 20, it's always, this is what you have. And that's why you make your own festival for it. And if you want these films, if you want to see these kinds of stories, you would probably go to an animation festival.
Okay. Well, I think we're out of time, and I just want to thank everybody in the panelists, especially for sharing their experiences. And I hope this was very helpful. Thank you very much.